Do you have Shopware 6 and actively run an online shop? Maybe you've just added a new product, adjusted an image, or changed some search logic, but the setting just isn't being applied to the storefront. If so, you're probably in the right place with this video because I'm going to explain what caches and indexes are, as this behavior is often related to them. But first, let's head over to the relevant settings. To do that, we'll go directly to Settings on the left-hand side, and then under System, we'll find the very first menu item, Caches and Indexes. But let's briefly explain the terminology first, just to make things a bit easier. Let's start with the cache. What does a cache mean? Or what is a cache, technically speaking? I should mention that I'm going to break it down quite a bit now, so that it's easy to understand. Basically, you can imagine that Shopware pre-saves the page that is displayed to your customer or to you, okay? It's like the page has already been put together once and is just sitting here. And as soon as someone asks for it, I just give it to them. That's much faster than having to gather all the information from scratch every time to then make it available to the customer or, of course, to us. Accordingly, it's something that's primarily intended to optimize loading times. But of course, it can happen that the cache contains old information that's still stored there. For example, there might be a product with a different name, or the image still looks different somehow, and yet I've already given that to the customer. Usually, I don't want that. So it makes perfect sense to refresh this saved state once again. And that brings us to the first menu item, because we can do what's called a refresh cache and simply update it, well, to reflect the changes made. We can also clear the cache completely. What happens then? It's like this. Then, well, a new cache is built the very first time the page is accessed. Okay, so if I access a product detail page for the first time, a cache is built for it. What does that look like? This means that the initial first call will naturally take a bit longer because Shopware has to gather the data and can't just output it as a pre-saved, as a pre-saved package, so to speak. I hope that was more or less understandable. Depending on how many adjustments we've made and what state our shop is currently in, both options make perfect sense. If I've just freshly cleared the cache, it can also make sense to refresh it again briefly and so on. So how you want to handle that is, of course, up to you. Exactly. Right below that, we come to the index, or rather, there are several of them, so the indexes. What does that mean? Basically, you can always think of an index as being like a phone book. If we want to find something quickly, then we can assign a value to it, yeah. And basically, every index is just a list of information that helps Shopware to output something more quickly. For example, there is a search index. That means for every term, there is more or less an entry for what should be found to speed it all up. Now, of course, it could be that I've adjusted my search logic and the phone book, meaning the index, is no longer correct. Then I just have to go and say, update indexes. I can update all indexes in Shopware, but I can also use the drop down here to say only the ones I want, like the categories, for example. So the category tree has an index, customers have an index, media has an index, products too, of course, and so on. And then I could go here and say, okay, I want all of this to be new, and then click on update, and it will be updated again to basically ensure that it's, up to date. And basically, that was a very simplified explanation of what these two terms mean and how you can, for example, trigger an update or clear the cache. You'll also find a documentation article about all of this in the video description. Everything is written down there again, possibly in a bit more technical detail. But for most people, it's enough to know, hey, if I click on that, the cache is empty, and then it's also applied to the storefront. It's also important to mention that there's a local cache, so your browser also pre-saves things. If you visited a page in your browser, for example, it's usually stored that way, and this cache can also affect how the website is displayed and potentially cause already updated data to not be shown correctly. In this case, you would have to clear your own browser cache. However, this is not a Shopware issue per se, but a general browsing topic that exactly should be considered independently of the technical, Shopware as a product software. And that's actually it for this topic. In any case, I wish you much success with your Shopware 6 shop and with the caches and indexes, and then, see you in the next video. Bye.